All right, we'll go ahead and get started. I appreciate y'all joining in person and on Zoom. I know some of y'all are driving home on Zoom or driving home from the joint conference, so be careful if it starts getting a little crazy out there. This is our annual OVT update slash sponsor meeting where we talk about things that have happened in the last year in the NC OVT program. Go through kind of what our plans are for the next year, some watch outs that we had by crop, some information by crop, really just to give you all a flavor for how the year went in 2024. So we're going to get started. I'm going to start with going through a reminder of how we are generating the amount of data we're generating on the OVT side, how we're delivering that data, and the grower response we've seen to that data thus far. We'll then go through some crop updates because I know that's what a lot of people want to see or hear about online. Corn, well, this is wrong. Corn's not first. Sorry, you were first last year. You get kicked to the back of the line. Also, after you told everybody that I yield better than anybody else growing corn in a drought year. We'll go through the crop updates, and then we'll talk. We'll end it by talking about the OVT program as a whole, our personnel changes that we've had, equipment that we've been working on in support of other programs that we've been doing. So I'm going to start with a big thank you to the sponsors for this last year. Your support this last year. We're actually up on total entries from last year by about 5. Most of that came with soybeans, a little bit on the wheat side. So you see the numbers back there across all the crops we've had. A very good amount of entries across all crops. You know, a little bit light on the oat, barley, and sorghum side, but maybe some opportunities to grow that moving forward. All told, and we're actually up on this number this year, 45 industry and university sponsors versus 42 back in 2023. So we're reaching a large percentage of the market that's selling varieties out in North Carolina. And a lot of thanks to the sponsors for believing in us, believing in what we're doing as a program, and supporting us and getting that data out to growers. That data is fairly large. I didn't believe this number when I calculated the other night, but we did over 17,000 plots worth of work last year across all of our crops. I say this with no hubris at all. We are the largest OVT program in the Southeast, far and away. Almost bigger than if you combine Tennessee, Virginia, and South Carolina together. I don't know nationally how we stand, but I have a feeling if we're not one of the biggest, if not the biggest, we're one of the biggest nationally as well. A lot of that is because I want to have as much data available to growers so you get the best view, best resolution on hybrid variety data and how it performs and how that relates to the growers so they can have the best selections possible. Again, our 3 major crops were wheat, corn, and soybeans this last year. Wheat, we're still at 7 locations, which we had upped a couple years ago. Corn, we're at 11 locations. We added the Edgecombe location this last year, so you're paying the same amount. You're not paying more, but you're actually getting an extra location. 11 locations as of this past year. And soybeans were up to 17 locations. That includes both full season and double crop. Soybeans definitely is one of the largest efforts that we have across the state, but I hope you see from the data we generated that it gets some good information. So over 17,000 plots worth of work. A lot of that thanks goes to this group. A lot of our crew is in this crew here at the office right now. For their efforts in scouting and spraying and getting equipment up and going and traveling and transporting and running equipment in the field. Y'all know that it takes long hours to execute this size of the program. And because of y'all, we're able to execute that and get that data out to growers. So thank you for that. So a lot of data. How are we delivering it? Same delivery method that we've been doing, or dual delivery method that we've been doing for the last couple of years. The first is our OVT website. That's where our location summary tables, that's where all the data tables go that we generate. So I don't have listed on here, but I should have the Excel data tables that I generate. They're on the OVT website. So if a grower doesn't want to go into our tool, they can go to the website, look at the Excel tables that we've constructed. We also pull reports out of our variety selection tool and post those to the OVT website. So again, the grower can have a very quick look at how data is for their operation. I should mention for those on Zoom, if you have a question as I'm talking, this is very informal. Just raise your hand or just shout out loud, and I'm happy to answer it. So OVT website, that's where our data tables exist. They're not as static as they used to be because they're in Excel or the reports coming out of the variety selection tool. But that's a good, quick, and dirty look for a grower that wants to look and see what varieties did well in this last year. This is an example of one of those tables. This is our location summary table. I've obviously cut it off because there's more locations running to the right of the screen. But here we can get a statewide look. This is for medium corn hybrids last year of how they performed. We can look across all the different locations that we tested at. Anything in green is a top yield group, so top LSD. Those are showing, so a grower can look at how things did statewide, look across all the different counties that we tested in, find their location or something close to them, see if that hybrid or variety was in green, identify that as an option for them for growing for the next year. We've been doing this since 2016. So we've had these location summary tables around for a while, but it's something that I like to highlight as something that we continue to support. The biggest thing that we've swapped to on tables coming to the OVT website are these above average reports, these reports that we're pulling out of the variety selection tool. So data is going into our database, and then we're getting calculations based off of what's above and below average based off the data that's there. We can then pull that data back out into a report like you're seeing here, look at raw yield, look at the number of times it was in the top LSD, which is that top yield group percentage. And then we can look at percent of trial mean. I'm really moving towards percent of trial mean for talking to growers about data, about variety data in their region, because that helps smooth out any kind of regional differences or regional skews that we get for the year. It also helps smooth out any kind of yield skews that we get year to year to year. And we'll talk about that a little bit when we talk about the different crops. But the nice thing here is a very visual element for the grower, because they can look just like they did on the location summary table. What are my top yielders? This is multiple years. What are my top yielders? And then look across the different regions and statewide, see what did really well on a percent trial mean basis across those different regions, which have multiple locations housed in them, and make selections that may not necessarily be at that top of that yield level based off of their region, if that makes sense. So I'm excited about this. We continue to support this element, is having reports to the varieties or to the OVT website, so growers can have a quick look if they want a quick answer to their variety questions. Of course, we continue to support our variety selection tool. This is a database we developed back in 2020. It contains data going back all the way to 2018 for corn and soybeans and all the way back to 2014 for wheat, which means we're upwards of 10 years of data, almost 11 years of data on wheat. We're upwards of 7 years of data on corn and soybeans. We can start making some very broad general ideas or looking at broad data and seeing what trends look like on maturity of soybeans, on planting date, on wheat, very similar items. So a very comprehensive database. It's where growers can look, can query for their results, can look at details of the different hybrids, how they've responded by region and by environment. And it's really where our focus is going to be when housing our OVT data that we're generating within the program. Okay. A lot of y'all are familiar with this already, but this is what the variety selection tool looks like. The overall data view that a grower would see, in this case, it's corn. We started this back in 2020 as a project with potatoes, because potatoes is using this tool for their genetic tracking for breeding. We were looking at a tool for getting that variety data out to growers. They were looking, the developers here were looking for something to kind of support. They kind of jumped on board with us. Since then, 15 universities across the country have adopted this tool for using as a variety selection tool. The cool thing for me, and something new, brand new, is as of this year, we talked in the past about linking this tool because we have 15 universities are also using this, linking that to those universities. That process has started. Auburn is linked to our tool, Clemson is linked to our tool, and Virginia Tech soybeans are linked to our tool. So we already have the opportunities for a grower to use the data in our tool and to be able to look at how the data in those surrounding or those OVT programs performed as well. More data, better opportunities for a grower to make a good selection for the hybrid or variety for their situation. So one of the things that I kind of focused on, I had to pause because half my screen's been hid. one of the things I focus on. Yes, sir, Billy.
Hey, yeah. On your previous slide, how does a grower access the data from somewhere like Clemson or Virginia Tech?
So it's not showing here because this is an old view of the variety selection tool, but there is where it says trial blocks there underneath data fields and varieties. If you click that trial blocks, that's where all the separate programs like Auburn is listed there, Clemson is listed there. So a grower can go into trial blocks and click on Clemson and say, I want to also see Clemson data at the same time.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Yep. Any other questions before I go forward? I am kind of going quick. I'm trying to keep this short and sweet so people don't get stuck in snow. one of the things I focused on a couple years ago is I realized we're doing a lot with getting data on websites or in tools, but really what we got to a point of is we put data in a website, we put data in a tool, and then I disappear for a couple weeks or I go to the field. We really haven't shepherded the process of a grower looking at that data, understanding what that data means to them. So what I started last year was what I call Zoom data webinars. So after every major crop release, wheat, corn, soybeans, I have a data webinar where I invite folks to get on Zoom. I know how much everybody loves Zoom, but to get on Zoom and I walk through what I would look for if I'm looking at this data, look for variety or hybrid selections for my operation. My hope there is to guide them in that process. It's not a variety selection tool training, although we do go through some aspects of the variety selection tool. But my hope there is to guide them through that process so that they can understand what they're looking at and what they should be looking for if they're looking for varieties or hybrids out of our data set. We had one in July for wheat this last year. We had one in November for corn. We are having one coming up January 22nd for soybean. I'm going to send that reminder back out to both the sponsors and our agents so that if you are interested in attending for that, for the soybean data webinar, I'll go into a deeper dive of the soybean data from this last year and talk about kind of what we saw and kind of how you go through that variety selection tool to find that data. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. You're going to see a little snippet of that in the soybean piece of what I'm talking about today, but it'll be a deeper dive on the 22nd.
How was the grower response to those?
To the webinars? They've mostly been agents that have been participating, which is fine because that's a heavy conduit of our data to a grower level. When we initially started, some growers were there, but I think particularly in this climate after we've done Zoom for 4 years, it's hard to say, hey, come to my Zoom and listen to this. My goal here is that I can put it into a recording. If you can't make it because you got something going on, all these are recorded. All these are put on our YouTube channel, so anybody can go back to them if they're interested in looking at how do I use the variety selection tool to find this data. Along those lines, what does our grower response look like to this data? It's actually been very positive. The gray bar that you're seeing there at the bottom, that's the very first year that we launched the variety selection tool. And this is a combination of data views between the variety selection tool and the OVT website, so keep that in mind. But you've seen a trend up. So the gray bar was that first year, the blue bar was that second year, the orange bar was 22, 20 or 23, 24. The yellow bar that you're seeing is 24. Well, no, I'm sorry. 22, 23 was the orange bar. 23, 24 was that yellow bar that you're seeing. Obviously, we did not get the peak that we saw last year. We saw a nice peak in December, January of last year. We didn't see that same peak, but we were very well trending with that same line this past year. That yellow line is trending with that orange line. I would argue that we're seeing a shift in when growers are looking for varieties, and I confirmed a little bit of this through conversations at the commodity conference. We're seeing a shift towards later variety selections than we've seen in the past. In the past, I think a lot of growers have gone and looked in November and December to make those selections. I think they're now more looking in December, January, February to make those decisions. And you can see that's sort of true because that yellow peak comes above orange when you come to February this last year. I don't have the data from this current year. I do, but it only goes until January. We're trending in the exact same direction as that yellow line. So we've gotten a good following. Overall, you're looking at, I got to do this, pop it in. 31,000, a little bit over 31,000 data views from this past year, and that correlates around 3,800 unique users. So on the variety selection tool, we can identify that's a unique user. We don't know who it is. We just know that they're different. And we've seen a little bit under 4,000 unique users using that tool from this last year. Yes, and Morgan says, I would also add that the January webinar is the least busy time of year, so that may help. Any questions on this, on the pull through to growers and grower response? And really, this is not just growers. It's going to be agents. This is going to be retailers. This is going to be crop consultants. This is going to be agronomists in the state.
Do you have any sense for how the other universities are advertising the tool, how they're trying to influence what users they're trying to influence for the tool?
The best information I have along those lines is Auburn. And I know Auburn does a lot of work through their commodity groups to try to make sure that they're aware, just like we do, to try to make sure that they're aware that the tool exists and how to use the tool and where that data delivery is coming. We do the same thing. A lot of our education comes through not only our agents, but also our commodity groups because they fund a large portion of each one of the crops. So they're part of it. They're bought into it. And we have conversations. I had conversation with Cameron Simpson last year about how to use the tool and different aspects of that. So, yes, sir.
Seed companies start talking to the farmers, begin to offer specials or deals on if you lock in how you get this amount off. Is that kind of like in that September? It looks like every year around September it starts spiking around.
So the question for those online, the question was, do I have a sense of when seed companies offer deals to growers? Yes. Early ordering, there's what's called early ordering deadlines. I don't know the specific timings, but generally for corn, that's around the November, December timeframe. For beans, I think it's been in December. I think I heard some that were saying January was there. I had a grower told me that his date was cut off in January for early ordering this year. So it's generally in that November, December, January timeframe, which is why we see the peak we saw, 2 years ago. I think what's happening is that particularly with commodity prices being where they are, with input prices being high, growers are kind of waiting, not to the last minute, but waiting later in that process to decide that they want to really move forward with purchasing or investing in that crop for the next season. That I don't know if you have any insight on that you've seen.
Corn, it starts in late October.
Right.
When I hear the first deal offered for early early purchase of corn seed, and ramps up through November 30th.
But have you have a sense of growers like how they've been approaching?
Yeah, really entirely. This year, they're really waiting on purchasing seed. They're not sure, first of all, that they were, particularly in November, early December, that they were plant much corn at all.
Right.
And now they're starting to see these prices change, so they're coming up and start to purchase a few bags of seed. I think it's just going to be later here. I don't.
I'll say, we get this initial spike when the data comes out because everybody wants to see the data and what the best hybrids were, and that kind of flattens off. And then it comes back up again when we start talking about, I want to make a decision what variety or hybrid I'm going to purchase for this coming year. That's where a lot of those data views come from, that decision process. So, any other questions before we move into crop updates? So that's how we've structured our data, how much data we've collected, how we're structured getting that to a grower facing element, and then the education that we've gone through that and kind of the response to that. I now want to move into crop updates. We're going to start with wheat. Wheat, you get to be first this year. Woohoo. Believe it or not, this was our second highest yielding wheat year out of the last 6. We actually had a very good wheat yielding average overall. Our highest was 2023, but we're not too far behind in 2024. The challenge being that we had a lot of disease pressure at some of these sites. I think we got actually been higher than 2023, if not for that. I don't know how easy it is to see in the back of the room, but scab kind of ate our lunch at Union County. That was into a standing corn stubble field. And we got significant scab levels. Now, that was bad for yields. That was bad for test weights. It was good for getting scab resistance ratings from that site that then went into the variety selection tool. Rowan was a really good yielding site out west. Person was pretty good. The further you went east, the better the yields got, where Tidewater was our best yielding region by far. Typically, the Piedmont out yields the Tidewater year in and year out. So that speaks to, at least for us, the pressure that scab was, particularly down in Union County. And it wasn't isolated to us. We saw scab pressure across a lot of different growers in that area. The other challenging element we had was take all that showed up at our Lenore location in the coastal plain. That kind of reduced our yields by at least, 10 to 15 bushel. We still were able to report that location because we had good clustering of varieties. We didn't have a lot of weirdness going on. When you got into some of the third-party tests that we had at that site, we had to drop complete tests because of the amount of take all that we had. So we got lucky in our placement of the test there, but we've made some changes to that test moving forward this year that will help kind of hopefully offset that. That was at the Hugo station. So that's at the northernmost station of those 3. Not a whole lot of, we obviously had some earlier heading this last year, but not a whole lot of freeze impact there. What you're seeing here is heading from early to late based off of GDUs of 50% heading. And then this is separated out. The orange balls are Tidewater, the green are Coastal Plain, the purple are Piedmont, and then I've drawn a trend line. Essentially, if we were in either the Coastal Plain or Tidewater, you had a yield advantage. These are yields based off of the GDUs. You had a yield advantage of being early for your varieties last year in wheat. We saw a flat response at Piedmont. Didn't matter whether it was early or late. Most of that makes sense. We don't usually see an advantage on the early side because I think they stay colder in the Piedmont. Early varieties tend to just not you do as well up there, but not a huge effect of freeze or that cold weather on our test last year. So some good and difficult from the prior year. So this is harvest year 2024. We had excellent yields at those locations that I mentioned. We got quality data out of Union per Quimens. The amount of dawn that we saw at Union was significantly high. So that was a good way of then inputting data through our extension part and talking to growers about the amount of dawn that we had in that area. But we got good falling numbers. Actually, I still had good falling numbers at that location. I had good falling numbers at our per Quimens location. And again, I mentioned we had FHV ratings that we took at Union. We did have some scab at Robinson. We took some ratings, but they were more of a support to the main ratings that we took at our Union site. So, and I should mention on the scab piece, and I think I might mention in the next slide, we're working with Christina Calger this year on scab screening all of the varieties in the OVT program. So moving forward, that screen will go through Dr. Calger's program and make sure we have good scab ratings for all the varieties that are entered. Yes. So that data will come out in this year for the first time. And actually, we're working together. We're going to have some of our folks, because of the number of varieties that are in that test, some of our folks are going to learn how to do scab ratings from Dr. Calger. And I think that's going to be a really good educational opportunity for us. Moving forward to this current year, so harvest year 2025.
Hey, Brian,
Yes.
it's Ken. Just a quick question on your scab ratings. Are you doing FDK? Are you doing incidence and severity, dawn testing? What is that protocol?
So the ratings that we took at Union this last year were all percent incidence. The ratings that we're going to be taking with Dr. Calger will be a combination of percent incidence and severity, because that's usually how she's taking ratings. But we'll get more information on that as we get involved with her program. But the ratings that we took last year were all percent incidence.
Cool.
So crop updates for this current small grain year. This is our Lenore location on the right. It's actually looking really, really good. All locations planned before Thanksgiving. That's always been my target. I want to be done with wheat by Thanksgiving, early if possible, but the way that weather and we were very dry planting. So the way the weather worked out this year, I was glad to be done by then. Very good to excellent stands at just about all of our locations. And we're getting really good bi-monthly scouting visits to each one of these sites by our entire crew with drone images, with reports. So we know how this crop is performing. We're able to take care of any issues as we're seeing them in the field. Like, for instance, we have some weeds coming in at our Robinson location. We already starting to get plans together for taking care of that, hopefully. Difficult for this current year is that I mentioned, had dry weather early in the planting cycle. And really cold weather has been slow, kind of hindering development, particularly at our Beaufort site. That wheat's up, that wheat looks good, but it took a while to get kind of to where it needs to be. And I don't know that we're at 3 tillers. I think we might be closer to 2, maybe even 1, Rod. What do you think? I mentioned the challenge with take all at the Hugo farm. We've had some challenges with both disease and Hessian fly at that site. So we went ahead and made the choice to move that test to the Caswell farm this year. I feel like we're in a good field at the Caswell farm. It's a field that I've had experience helping others in with harvest in the past, and I've been impressed with it. From what I've seen, of course, that looks good now. Who knows what it looks like in a couple of months, but from what I've seen thus far, I think we're off to a good start. So we're going to be at the Caswell farm. We're going to see how that kind of works out down there. I want to get away from the amount of disease and insect pressure that we had at Hugo for a little bit, at least. So you want to mention anything on wheat?
If we talk about personnel, we're going to talk about his responsibility.
That's all. That'll be at the end. Yep. Any questions on wheat before I move forward? Okay. Corn. You weren't last. I kicked you down the curb a little bit. So as Dr. Heiniger mentioned at the meeting, even with the drought pressure we had this year, we were our third highest yielding year for corn in the OVT. And I don't pretend to know why. I will say that we are very strict with what we do and don't release. So we take out some of the low end, like I'm not reporting 50 bushel or 80 bushel environments because the data is just too variable. So I think that impacts this number, obviously. But to be honest, with the amount of drop pressure that I was seeing around the state, I figured I would lose over half of my tests at the very least, and I didn't. We'll talk about that here in a minute, but I lost a very minor number of locations compared to what I assumed I would lose. And they're mostly confined to one region, but we'll talk about it here in a second. So third highest yield of corn over the last 8 years, because I went back 8 years for that. Dr. Iyer mentioned this at the meeting. This is 2024 only. This is looking at maturity and then yield by maturity. Now, obviously, there's some skew here because I don't have equal number of entries by maturity. So there's more in the 113 to 114 than there is in the 120. But you see the trend there. We obviously were a little bit better off on the later side when it came to the hybrids that performed in our tests this year. And Dr. Heinger showed the exact same thing when he showed the coastal plain table. A lot of late hybrids showed well in this last year. That being said, it wasn't all sugar dreams and coconut plums or whatever it is. We did have some locations we had to drop. And we were very strict in how we did that because I didn't want one to get into a space where bad data was getting into the database and then that was affecting data moving forward for how hybrids are being selected. So, when we look at a coastal plain, yes, our average yield was 162. Bertie was 212 of that. That skewed a lot. Coastal plain yields are going to skew a lot towards Bertie this year because they got timely rains. They were almost a garden location compared to a lot of other coastal plain locations this year. Robinson was probably our worst coastal plain location, and that was 128. The grower around me was cutting 70 and 80. So we were lucky. Now, I will say that OVTs tend to be 10 to 15% higher on yield because of the alley effect that we have in those tests. But even with that built in, the rankings still stay the same. So we saw a diversity of locations in the coastal plain. It's cut off, but we didn't report the Edgecombe location. I'll talk about why here in a minute. You notice that says irrigated, we didn't report it. I'm going to mention that here in a second. Piedmont was a completely different story. I did not report any. I reported one location out of the 4 that we planted in the Piedmont. I harvested 5 bushels per acre of bulk corn, 5 acres worth at our Yadkin site. There was more smut in that corn than there was actually corn in the field. We harvested the Union site. I thought it was an opportunity that we might be able to report it, but there was so much field variability based off of low and high spots in that field that we just could not move forward with it. Rowan was irrigated. We got good irrigation. It was gun irrigated, so we got good irrigation on our tests. But I have heat maps that show where that irrigation cut off on some of the other third-party tests that we had out there. The Piedmont was very challenging this year for growing corn. Very opposite story in the Tidewater, at least for other locations we were at. Obviously, we weren't at some of the tougher locations, but our highest yields by far were in the Tidewater because that's where we got timely rainfall. I think the opposite was probably the problem later on when we got too much rainfall. Rod, would you agree? Let's talk about Edgecombe. So this is the heat map. The top you're looking at is the yield heat map for Edgecombe. The bottom is our spatial map. This is how it's laid out. So the green on the bottom here is our medium test. The blue on the right is our late test. If you're looking at the heat map, this comes straight off the combine. We look at this as we're cutting so we know if we have any issues either with the combine or we can start identifying issues in the field. When I started cutting this, I'm like, oh, well, it's kind of low here at the front. It's 125, but it's 190 to 214 in the back corner. This is the irrigated location. What do you think is happening with that red circle? That's where we're 20 to 40 bushels. And it's right in between where our medium and late tests come together. There's a clay spot. There's a clay spot in that field. We identified that the clay spot was there. We didn't think anything of it because, well, it's there. We've already identified the field. We're here. We've laid it out. We're planting it. Even with the irrigation we had in this field, we could not overcome that clay soil type change. And that's a significant enough of effect because it trends into all of the late tests essentially, but it cuts off almost half of the medium tests. So there's not enough reps that I could report. But that's the razor's edge we existed on in 2024 corn. The difference between 200 bushels and 30 bushels was, in this case, soil type. Just a soil type change from a sandy loam to a clay loam in the middle of that field. This is Edgecombe. This is on the upper coast plain. So, and that's a good question, Rod. So the irrigation here was initiated after we had encountered stress. So we had early season stress, then we initiated irrigation. Obviously, the sandy parts of this field were able to release that water and let that corn kind of overcome or get out of that stress. And we saw that as we were scouting it. Really bad look early on, and then all of a sudden looked really, really good. The middle part of that field with the clay soil type held the water, didn't release it, and they couldn't come out of that stress. So it speaks not only to the soil type change, but the timing of that irrigation. You know, it wasn't just the fact of, oh, just turn your water on, everything's fine. It had to be timed out, and I was late in getting that message out to make sure that we can get that gun on in time there. So, kind of overall summary. Where we had rain, we had decent, excellent yields, very, very high yields at our Bertie site. That's probably the highest yields I've seen at that location, probably the highest yields I'll see at that location, at least for the next 5 years. Difficulties, we've lost 4 locations, 3 of those to drought. Edgecombe, we talked about the clay soil spot in the middle. We didn't lose Beaufort, but we are starting to really feel the pressure of build bugs at that location. And I don't have it indifferent because I've been kind of kicking around the idea of maybe thinking about moving that corn location to a different field. Same farmer if we can, but maybe to a different field where we don't have the same build bug pressure. What do you think, Rod? Okay. We've overcome it. We've been able to outgrow it because of the amount of starter that we're putting on. But if you look at something like Matt Krakowski's USDA breeding sets, which are also there, they just get hammered by it. And maybe it's a good selection for him, but at the same time, it's challenging to kind of get good, consistent data off of that situation. Yeah. So I'm looking at maybe changing that this year, just so that we can get out of that build bug pressure. If there's other fields, same grower in that area that we can go to instead. I mentioned we added the Edgecombe location. We're going to stay at Edgecombe this coming year. Edgecombe, it's a really good location. We're yielding 200 bushel, irrigated. I think we just need to make some changes on when we start that irrigation piece at that location. And it'd be nice to have a sandy loam irrigated site because we don't typically have that in our general setup. The other thing, I mentioned it at the meeting to a bunch of sponsors on this call, but I'm going to reiterate it. For those putting corn entries into the OVT this year, we're allowing up to 3 non-BT entries for free. That can be full conventional, that can be Roundup Ready, as long as they're non-BT. My goal is I want as many non-BT options into our OVT database as possible so we can have options for growers to make those selections moving forward. Because those growers are under pressure. I know the companies, I know you all are under pressure to provide non-BT or refuge hybrids available. So I'm providing that as an opportunity for those that are interested. And I'll mention this in the email when I send it out. Up to 3 per company of non-BT can be in the test for free or entered for free. Any questions on corn? Pat, do you have any comments on corn?
All the data you did this year during the drought conditions we had. And I agree. I wish we could have saved some of those locations. But, I mean, Oxford, there was nothing there. And same with Yadkin, Union, it just was too bad.
Yeah. We go through a fairly stringent QA/QC process when this data comes out. It's not just Ryan making this decision. It goes through a bunch of other folks within the program to make sure that the data looks reasonable, that we don't have outliers that are extreme, that we don't have some weird clustering going on. Because I don't want to get us into a situation where there's bad data in that database and then we start skewing that data down the road. So,
hey Ryan,
yes,
sir. This is Billy. The Bertie site was not representative of most of the county.
Right.
Let everybody know that we were pretty dry in most other spots, but that one just happened to get the rain.
Right. And that's why I do want to mention that. So the cooperator there said he was irrigating all around me. So whether there was just a rainstorm that sat on top of that field and rained whenever it needed it or what, but the cooperator was just running nonstop irrigation all around that field. So for better or worse, we were in a very garden spot of that county this last year. So, all right, moving on to soybean update. I don't know why this is loading in like this. So we're up to 17 locations, as I mentioned earlier. There we go. We've done a really good job of starting to split out our double crop locations into actual double crop situations, so planted behind wheat where at all possible. Wherever you see split green, blue X's there, we've split out those locations, so it's a different field for full season double crop, which means that the double crop's behind wheat, because it's important to me for us to start seeing the response of these varieties into a planted into wheat situation. The only two anomalies for that was from this last year, Beaufort, where we did a delayed planting at that site, because I don't think Hoyt had a lot of wheat in that same field or in that area that we could have planted into. And then our Rowan location, where we're never going to have wheat available. That's just, it's a station. So we're always kind of going to be in a delayed planting situation there. But everywhere else we had double crop, we were behind wheat. We ended up with 9 full season locations, 8 double crop locations. So really good split between both planting dates. I do want to mention that we had also added edge cone, that blue blue X this last year, which is why we're up to 17. Typically, our 17th location would be out at Mills River. I didn't know what was going to happen with Hugo and everything else, or Helene, before we made this decision, but we made the decision not to go out there this last year, and we would not have had a test to harvest regardless, either way. I'll mention it later on, but we're going to talk to them here soon and see what their opportunities are for having tests planted there this coming year, because I don't want to be in a position that I'm hauling equipment into a space where they're just not ready for us yet. And if we do end up planting out there, that'll be, we're up to 18 locations. But typically when we plant it out there, it's just been group 3 and early group 4. So it won't be the full OVT test. So this is hot off the presses. This is the results of our data from this last year. Clustered full season and double crop yields together. We were about 7 bushels better full season than we were double crop. There's a maturity group effect to this, but if we look just at full season, maturity group 4 is by far and away our best yielder. It's highlighted in green. Anything highest is high yield green, and then fell off from there down to MG 7 and 8. That aligns with Dr. Van's data from the last couple of years. Planting early, we're really seeing an advantage of group 4 varieties in that situation. You split it out by region, and overall, outside of the coastal plain, which is a little bit of an anomaly, group 4s were the highest yielding across the different regions as well. So even with that early heat stress, the group 4s were still able to overcome that, not abort as many flowers as I expected we were going to abort, and still out yield the other maturity groups. For you, Rod, if you're trying to look at it, you were 84.5 for group 4, and you went down 79, 65, 62. So you kind of fell off as you came off that group 4. So full season, group 4 was the best maturity group to look at. Outside of the coastal plain, where we're kind of, you could do a 7 or 8 or 8 or a 4. I think a lot of that is the stress, because I think the stress there hit in that 5-6 range, where the 4s were able to get done, reproduced or pod load early, and then the 7s were the ones that got out of it after we're outside of that stress range. If you look at double crop, the story is 5 through 7 was probably our best. There is a little bit of a dip there through 6 that honestly, we're very much almost identical throughout that entire range outside of maturity group 4. Again, that aligns with Dr. Van's data, where once we get later, it doesn't really matter what maturity group you plant. 5 through 7 is generally okay. Split out by region. Again, the laters, 5 was the best in coastal plain tidewater, 7 and 8 in the Piedmont. But in the Piedmont, again, you're 82 through 83. So very similar yields across the different maturity groups. If you look at the different traits, we're really not seeing a whole lot of drag. Now, obviously, if you've got, we've got 10, 15, 10 data points here, take those with a grain of salt. There's going to be a little skew there. But if you look at Enlist STS, and compare them to XtendFlex, STS, very similar. not seeing a big drag, at least in our data, on using a different trait, enlist versus extend. So pretty consistent yields. Even, conventionals are behind a little bit, but still competitive yields on the conventional side. The ones that are failing here are the Roundup Readies, where we're down to 70, but again, there's only 59 data points there, so there's not a whole lot of data to show a trend. So for updates for this year, this is our bean scouter, Eliza, at a bean scouting event. The good is we had high yields in many locations, good uniform dry down. Didn't have a lot of green stem pressure this year. We were very successful in identifying when we had stink bug pressure coming into our fields and getting those sprayed with our spray drone, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. We did get a successful split of full season double crop, like I mentioned, across all of our different sites. We were able to execute a union full season double crop field on time this year, just like we did last year. All told, 17 locations, far and away the biggest number of locations I've ever executed in a season, particularly with the size of the soybean test that we have. And I know this seems minor, but we got our alleys finally lined up when we were using the drill, which has been a challenge for us in the past. Difficult being we did have some tests that we lost. Union double crop, Robinson double crop due to oversaturated soils, not too dry, but too wet. Granville full season where we both had deer pressure and cooperator pressure. Because our cooperator forgot that flags mean plant outside, so they planted a circle around the field and inside. And then drought at Sampson double crop. And then we've had some combine issues delaying harvest. I'll talk about equipment very quickly, very quickly here in a minute. Different, we're going to keep with the Edgecombe location that we added. And again, I mentioned we're waiting to see what Mildred River says about their capabilities of supporting a soybean test out there this year. I don't want to be in a space where we're trying to be in everybody's way. So any questions on soybeans? Mm-hmm. Yep. Do really well. I mean, if you look at, I don't have the table, but if you looked at Dunphy's performance against other group sixes, very, very well. And like you saw with the trait breakdown, conventionals they're a little behind, but they're not tens of bushels behind. And they're a couple bushel behind where you're looking at enlist and extend. So they're a really good option for a grower if they want to go into a traitless situation and maybe at a lower cost point. Rachel, did you have any comments you want to make on soybeans?
I just want to applaud Ryan and his team for their great work as always, hustling out there and all the help that you give the soybean extension program when we need it with equipment and other things. And great work, Eliza, and your first year scouting. I guess I have one question, Ryan. Did Leanne, I feel like I heard Leanne rated for disease, but maybe that's in future years. Can you just give an update on where we're at rating the OVT for soybean disease?
Yes, and this will actually be a corn piece too. So we've initiated conversation with both Daisy Amada on the corn side and Leanne Lux on the soybean side around rating the OVT for disease once we have opportunistic disease that comes in. I think both of them I know Leanne had traps. I'm pretty sure Daisy also had what's called spore traps out in the field to identify if there was any pressure coming into the field, spores flying around in the air. I don't think Leanne ended up rating anything, and I really didn't see a whole lot of disease out in our tests this last year. But that is something we're talking about doing moving forward for sure. All right. Anything else?
Awesome. Thanks.
Yep, no problem. Anything else on soybeans? Okay, real quick, sorghum. We're still supporting the sorghum test. I mentioned we have kind of not a huge number of entries in there. We had 12 this last year. The good news from this last year is we went from one company putting varieties in to two companies putting varieties in. So we have a little bit more diversity. Dad's program was I appreciate him helping support getting that executed this last year with the planting and the harvesting. That's really key in helping us getting that supported while we're running around the state doing 17 soybean and 11 corn locations. 4 locations of that this last year, 2 in Bertie County, 2 in Washington County at the research station. Good stands. We had excellent stands at both locations. The biggest challenge is we lost Washington double crop due to bird damage. But overall, really good yields at the 3 that we were able to report. again, the different or not different, I guess it should also be difficult, but we're at 12 entries. Yeah. Now we're up 2 entries and we're up one company from last year, but we're still at a very low level. Now I say that, and Dr. Post got a email 2 days ago asking, do we have any sorghum data for a grower that's looking and interested in sorghum? And with corn prices being where they are, and with the corn yields that we had last year due to the drought, obviously this is going to be an important piece for growers that can find the market to sell this grain into this coming year. So I'm not going to discontinue the project, but we need to be aware that we're still at a really low level. I mean, I really wish I had some more company entries and performance here. And I think if acreage starts growing because of the difficulties in corn, and maybe it prices out better to do sorghum if you have a market than corn, I don't know. But maybe we start getting some of those bigger companies to start coming back in. Yes, Jeremy.
Was there just not enough interest to justify the Piedmont location?
Well, we've kept it concise because of the low number of entries, and so because Dad's helping us with the logistics in the field, that keeps it local to him, and the execution, we can make sure we get it executed well, we get good data out of it. So
how much investment and time can you put in?
Right.
And if you're gonna do them, you gotta do it right, so we needed to have them closer to Plymouth to be able to monitor and do the things we need to do. If we increase entries, well, then it's worth going.
It'd be worth going all the way to Rockmore.
I mean, I would look at probably, because Union County, Rowan to Union County tends to be the other hotspot of sorghum. So that would be my next place. But I agree with you. We need to up the number of participation in that if we can get to that level.
Question for the growers, why we continue.
Right.
Understanding that after sugar cane acres went down, company interest was low because they couldn't find anybody to buy sorghum. But now with it, as the guy from Clemson said today, the change in the nature, they were not seeing sugar cane anymore.
Right.
And that certainly was true in the trials we had here. These were beautiful fields. So there's no one.
Birds are a challenge, but birds are always a challenge. I mean, that's always been a challenge for us. So, any other questions on sorghum? Okay. So that's all I've got for crop updates. I want to move in real quick to our program updates, talk about people, talk about equipment, and a couple of miscellaneous things. We'll be done. This is our current crew as it currently stands. We've added 2 people, Kayla and Jawan, as our temporary folks. Kayla started in October, Jawan started in September. I may have those dates wrong because I was in the combine, but they've been doing an awesome job helping us with scouting, helping us with graduate projects. So they've really kind of hit the ground running. All told, as it stands right now, and this includes our 2 undergrads, we're at 13 people. So we have a very filled out crew, and that's been good because we can send different groups to different parts of the state. We can get scouting done on a regular basis. We still have our 2 graduate students, Khadijah and Marco, who presented posters at the joint conference this week. One thing that I've started working on, started a couple years ago, but we're really going to have an emphasis on it moving forward, is that each of our permanent full-time folks, and that's Taylor, and that's Jeremy, and that's Eliza, are given a crop. So Taylor has wheat, Jeremy has corn, Eliza has soybeans. Their crop is their responsibility. Starting this year, that was a idea a couple years ago, and now it's going to become a reality this year where they're telling me what we should be doing for these crops. Then I'm helping guide that, so that I can be more available to help with some other things that are going on the corn side. But their focus right now is on their crop. Taylor, do you want to talk about what you're doing in wheat right now?
Yeah, excuse me. We just did finish our first round of scouting all locations, so hopefully we'll start that back up next week. Everything's looking fairly decent so far. We'll probably try to get out and spray a few locations soon.
Yep.
But overall,
so you're gonna see a lot more of them when it comes to these specific crops than necessarily me. I've got to start stepping back on the amount of time I spend in a combine, a planter, or on a truck driving a piece of equipment across the state. So be on the lookout for them when you're talking to them about different crops. Did you want to talk about that, Eddie? Okay. The one thing and one emphasis I want to bring up is that we are probably the leading program, one of the leading programs at the university when it comes to spray drones. We bought a spray drone 2 years ago, last year, 2 years ago. The idea when we bought it was we needed something to apply pesticides, mainly insecticides, later on in the season, both in corn that was past VT and soybeans that were past R1. Because we could not get, obviously you can't get corn through, tractors through a corn that's already VT, but we couldn't get through our beans without destroying plots to get those insecticide sprays out. We bought that, and what that's turned into is Jeremy's become very much a subject matter expert along with like Nagy out west with that group, and working along with Jason Ward and some of the other folks at BAE to really kind of establish what we can and can't do on a spray drone side, but really flesh out that program. So Jeremy, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, the first year was kind of a slow start, getting equipment operating, and this just speaks to a lot of the issues that your commercial operators are going to have. They sent us a faulty piece of equipment, and we didn't know until it came time to activate it that, you know, we'd already, it put us months behind because they sent us a remote that didn't work and had to, you know, issues with that. But this year it really got put to use, especially, and we had a major rice project where we're comparing, we had a 10-acre field, and everything they did with their ground equipment on their main fields, we did with the drone on the sample field, and we're comparing, you know, application windows, time of application, price, rate, anything like that to try and come up with these price points of, you know, at what point should you buy a drone for your operation? At what point should you pay someone to come make applications? At what point should you decide to start your own, you know, outsourcing of your drone for other uses? But for us in the program, we made a few corn applications, but it really got its use in soybeans. And it was definitely beneficial for those late season applications where the beans were too high, but where it really shined was that timing window of, we need to get this out, but it just rained. I can't get a tractor in the field, you know, and that's where it really pulled its value. And it was even issues where we'd go 1 week and we'd be back in the same field the next week with a different chemical, just based on the insect pressure that was coming through. It got used statewide from the coast of Piedmont. We had a couple issues with some breakage, but nothing that was, you know, it's quick turnaround, a couple days waiting for parts to come in. And that's just getting used to having this equipment and learning what you need to keep on hand and what you need to be prepared for in the field, which it's okay. I don't mind being the guinea pig for stuff like this, and I don't mind being able to tell other people, you know, this is what you need, and this is absolutely why you need it, because, you know, that's a problem we ran into. It's been a major request from a lot of people. As you can see, we had 2 major field days that we went to and presented at, and there was good response from the stations, from growers, lots of questions from researchers. I get calls from cooperators asking about things, and there's been there was a huge training, I say huge, but relative to the number of people involved in this industry in Caldwell County, where they had basically the nation's leading expert in air blast sprayers, which the science behind that directly translates here. So while, you know, there's not a ton of information out about that concept has existed for years and years, and it's just a matter of what I've learned from meeting with operators and people with questions. It's a lot of people just want to get it and go, but we've been able to make micro adjustments based on what we've learned. It's not the recommendation from the companies, but the recommendation from the companies to get everything done as efficiently as possible is not effective as they want to be. So that's why it's very important for us as a university to get behind this and figure out on the ag side, on the application side, what do we need to be doing? You know, it's not about getting stuff out faster and just phrase that appropriately, have it blow away in the wind. You know, if you don't have your settings right, that's all you're doing. And it's a great piece of equipment. It looks nice, but it's just causing more problems than the solution. So we need to be able to have these examples from us as a program because we've tackled insect pressure in ways that I haven't seen since I've been here, which I've been here 8 years, believe it or not. But and it's really helped with yield. It's really helped us have tests that we can purchase.
Yep.
So that's all I've got about that.
So, I mean, and Jeremy spoke to it, like my goal was to use a spray drone to help support the OVT program because our gap was stink bug control in corn, stink bug and worm control in beans. And we were not executing on that gap because of timing, because of state of crop at those 2 stages. Since we've started using the spray drone, we're more than executing on controlling those timings.
How much have you done like that?
35,000.
So if you bought this drone today, it'd be 13 for just the drone. But the batteries are $2,000 a piece. The charging unit is thousands of dollars. The equipment. If a farmer bought this, they would not be prepared to use it appropriately because you have to have the infrastructure to transport it around and the vehicle to transport it with the tanks, the plumbing, water source in the field, things like that. But all in all, our full package is about 35.
What are y'all hauling this?
So we actually, the last year we hauled it around in an enclosed trailer, about a 12-foot enclosed trailer.
Yeah.
With some tanks and stuff inside, but quickly found out that it was effective for what we needed, but it wasn't very efficient. So we moved to a larger gooseneck trailer solution with a upper deck platform. So that's what we've been trying to get together over the winter. Hopefully that'll make things run more efficiently in the next year.
So as an example of using a technology, obviously I have this slated for OVT, but it's expanded beyond that. You know, we've leveraged it into agent tests that required a drone component for fungicide treatment in corn. We've leveraged it. We're going to be leveraging it into a fungicide project funded by the soybean board with Dr. Lux next year. There's going to be opportunities for us to do some collaborative efforts with Dr. Cahoon and others. Yep, I forgot about that. Yep.
And we generated really basic data, but it's something to move forward with to make sure with some funding.
And just to speak toward that, we did that demonstration, got those results in the field. Since then, I attended that training I was talking about and made the changes that probably tripled the spray coverage on those areas for that drone. So, and as fast as data is coming in, more data is needed.
Yes, there's a big need for more of that.
Well, it goes to show that we're able to use a piece of technology that was slated for the OVT, but expand it to a leading edge technology and Jeremy's I want to give him kudos. He's done an excellent job, not only with supporting this technology, but doing it in a responsible way, making sure that our certifications are done the way they need to be done, making sure that everybody is educated and aware that it's not just go buy a drone from Best Buy and fly it wherever you want to go, that there are rules and regulations associated with that, particularly not just with the flying of it, but with the herbicide application, the pesticide application of that, and identifying what those environments and what those treatment levels should look like to be safe and responsible. So it's going to be an opportunity for us as a program moving forward, specifically for Jeremy, to be a leader, both within our college and maybe within the university in identifying ways to use this technology responsibly. We have plans for him to go meet with Dr. Lee down in Auburn, who's been the very leading of this technology, to start working with him and see if there's opportunities of collaboration there as well. So those are drones. They're a bit like seeing drones. Overall, we've kept my standard of supporting other projects that are not just OVT. When I met with Jeff back in 2016, and I know he thought I was crazy when I said this comment, I said, I don't want just the OVT to be providing OVT data. If we're as large as I want us to be, I want us to leverage that technology and that expertise and then supporting other programs. And I know you told me you thought I was crazy when I mentioned that to you that day. And we've done that. I feel like we've done a really good job of that. This is over 7 years now, but 70 to almost 90 trials worth of planting harvester data support that we've done because we have the equipment to be able to go out and cut a plot. We have the equipment to go out and plant a plot. The highlights I have here is we've supported the Southeast Regional Agent Cord hybrid testing, which includes 19 counties in that region. Dr. Kaliza has corn and soybean litter applications at Oxford and Lenore. We've harvested those the last 2 years for her. And then soybean waffle root knot nematode testing that Dr. Gorney has done down in Whiteville. We've helped support and harvest those tests the last couple of years. And I know I'm missing a bunch. Like this is just a taste of what Ryan could remember when he was putting this project together. Yes.
Lots out that equipment that's been challenging to get enough plots out or not have enough technical staff. You know, having a big team like this means we can really help support groups that don't have more than one technician or more than one student.
So I've been very
Yes.
well, I've been very proud of that part because yes, we need to be successful on getting OVT data, good quality, variety, and hybrid data out to growers. That is our primary responsibility. But within that space, we have the size and surface and scale that we can leverage all of this into support of other tests. And I see a lot of that moving forward. Like I don't see that stopping. I see that accelerating, honestly. Particularly if we start getting into more drone centric projects. So that's all I've got. You may have any questions overall.
Is there any more equipment you want to talk about?
Just a couple. I didn't have a slide on it because we didn't really buy any equipment this last year. Honestly, the biggest hurdles that we're going to face moving forward is combines. We have 3 combines. I have 1 combine that currently has an engine that doesn't want to run. My hope is that I can get some information on why that engine doesn't want to run before we have to start harvesting again. But for the most part, we're in a replacement cycle. Like we've done the work, we've done the heavy lifting of swapping out everything the OVT had, from gleaners to old semi trucks to 1999 silver F350s with a cassette tape player in it, to updated equipment. But now we're in replacement. You know, we bought a new F450 in 2018. That or F450 already has 150,000 miles. You know, because that's how much driving we do. I've Google tracked me. I know that scares a part of y'all. And it told me I drove 60,000 miles last year. And that's just driving. You know, that's the amount of wear and tear that we're putting on these trucks and trailers. That's always going to be a piece that we're going to have to be looking at replacing as we kind of go through. We're trying to be smart. We're trying to be targeted when we do those replacements to make sure that they're going to last us for as long as they need to last us for, and that maybe there's opportunities for us to use them across multiple disciplines and not just for us. So,
Ryan, the funds you get from NC, are you able to put them into accounts that you can carry over from year to year to build for maintenance?
I am not.
Replacement?
No, I am not.
I was wondering if you did.
Another advantage of the equipment and the replacement pieces. Yeah, we use a piece of equipment until when he got here, a lot of the equipment was junk. Boneyard should have been parked somewhere or scrapped before he got here. And some of that has been spread around, and people who could use it that don't have the heavy use that we have can get some more use out of it. But that's true of many of the pieces of equipment that we have obtained since then, in that, we just transferred 2 trucks to other programs. They're not going to meet our requirements for their life anymore, but they absolutely can run somebody up and down the road to some extension meetings, things like that. But they just couldn't haul anymore. They couldn't do the job that we needed them to do. And that helps support other programs where maybe equipment funding is very hard to come by. Whereas even though we can't carry over, we have a good opportunity to replace at least one thing every year if we're real careful.
Yeah, when I said 2016 we were crazy, that primarily was because of what you inherited. Angela just talked about the equipment. The budget was also upside down.
Yep.
So you had a lot of obstacles to overcome, and I'm just so proud of where the program is now. That's thanks to your leadership, Angela's leadership, the great team you have. Like yesterday or Wednesday at the small grain, when your cohort came in, it was like this group of this village of people. But I also think back to changing from the green book to going online.
Yep.
and the pushback that you got from the growers and the challenges that represented. But the great job you all do in terms of getting data out of it. It used to take 2-3 months, and now it's like a week or 2 after you finish harvesting, and that data is cranked back out. And available for the growers to make decisions.
Yep.
Over 17,000 plots, and the miles you all drive, you all do a phenomenal job. So thank you for what you do. It's very impressive.
I appreciate that. I mean, and a lot of that is towards making sure we have good quality data for our growers. I've told many farmer groups, I said, if I'm not doing a job that's helping you, I will quit and I'll go drive a truck for you, or I'll go drive a tractor for you, because at least I'm helping you. I'm doing something positive for you. You know, we're still iterating it. We're still, you know, nothing's perfect. We're still trying to identify where there's places that we can improve on. So that's the goal moving forward. You know, equipment, I think we're in a good space. We just got to be prepared for the next piece of equipment that breaks, that we're ready to funnel funding where it needs to go in order to replace it. Any questions from those people online or comments?
Ryan, Morgan Menaker here from Union. Just want to say, with all the difficulties you had this year, really appreciate the work that you guys do, and you handled those challenges very well. So thank you.
Thanks, Morgan. All right. Well, that's all I've got. I appreciate y'all's time. I will be sending this recording out so that folks can share it if they need to look at it or want something to sleep to. So thank you. Thank you for stopping by, and thank you for those online for attending.
Great work, Ryan and
Thank you.
team.
Thank you.